This is episode 6 of the Alien Agenda. If you missed any of the previous 5 episodes, a link to the playlist can be found in the comments section below. Many cases of UFO landings are known, although they don't happen often. For aliens, there's the risk of being caught off guard and ending up as an unfortunate addition to the Hangar 18 collection at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, or an area known as Area 51, where many underground rooms were built to study aliens and their technology. The Americans themselves do not always grasp the consequences of these contacts, especially the use of alien technology, which could have highly adverse effects on them. But let's move on from speculation to concrete and well-documented phenomena related to UFO activities on our planet. The statistics on landings are not very reliable, as they usually occur in secluded places. So far, there have been 5,000 recorded UFO landings in 65 countries worldwide. Usually, they prefer to land at night. As they approach the ground, they deploy struts and supports. Landings are typically brief, lasting about 5 minutes. They are usually spotted due to the beams they use to illuminate the landing site, though these sites are typically discovered later, once the saucers have left. Landing sites tend to alter the local magnetic field. Scientists and ufologists strive to record the impact of these landings, including the radiation levels and any unusual phenomena, including effects on human health. Each landing, naturally, leaves a mark on the soil. Landing traces are evident on snow, where a black circle of thawed ground remains after takeoff. The size of the circle obviously indicates the size of the UFO. The circles detected so far have varied in diameter from 8 to 60 meters or more. There have been instances of UFOs landing in pairs, possibly for added security. Generally, traces of support gear are left behind. These supports sink into the soil by 5 to 6 centimeters. The depth of the holes allows an approximate calculation of the craft's weight. Sometimes, quite deep boreholes are left behind, such as in the village of San Juan del Obispo in Guatemala, where a borehole 60 meters deep was found. The borehole diameter was 60 centimeters. It is believed that such holes are left by devices generating antimatter. In the summer of 1989, near the village of Izamal on the Yucatan Peninsula, residents found a circular area 12 meters in diameter. Underneath it were 5 holes shaped like overturned buckets, with walls melted at temperatures of 1,200 to 1,300 degrees, as determined by experts. The soil showed significantly elevated levels of strontium, titanium, and rare earth elements. A similar site found in 1972 in Delphos, Canada, was dehydrated to a depth of 35 centimeters and glowed for several nights afterward. Zinc levels on the site were 200 times higher than average. There are 35 well-documented cases of soil dehydration like this. One of the favored places for UFO landings is an anomalous area in northern Queensland, Australia. UFOs began frequenting this area immediately after World War II, but sightings increased in the 1960s. Jim Teal, an innkeeper at Eaton Range near the town of Mackay, saw a small glowing sphere descend right in front of his inn on May 23, 1965, leaving numerous marks on the grass and the tops of trees. 6 months later, from January 14th to 19th, 1966, in the locality of Yoramo, local resident Mick Hyde and several police officers observed a large object in the sky, along with 6 75-centimeter translucent spheres that floated a meter above the road. The spheres were egg-shaped. Hence, the area became known in the Australian press as UFO nesting grounds. Isolated incidents continued in subsequent decades. There have also been cases of UFO landings on ice. In January 1990, Alexander Vorontsov saw a UFO resembling a spinning top in Marefa, Ukraine. It was 25 meters in diameter, 10 meters in height, and had a blue stripe around its perimeter. It hovered over the frozen Menja River, melting a circle in the ice estimated to be 22 meters in diameter. The melted ice sank, then floated back up and refroze, creating a circle with a rim of frozen ice around it, almost as if the hole had been welded shut. In summer, landing sites often showed marks akin to scorched grass. Sometimes, so-called angel hair falls to the ground when a UFO approaches. These fibers later turn into a gelatinous mass. Studies have shown a high content of boron, silicon, calcium, and magnesium in this substance. Some landing sites are notable for their lack of microorganisms, such as bacteria, protozoa, algae, and fungi, as if they have been eliminated by radiation. Anomalous phenomena on well-known UFO routes also include geomagnetic field changes, which tend to persist for a long time. The oldest known site of such anomalous phenomena is Lake Robozero, over which bright, glowing objects were recorded in monastery chronicles dating as far back as 1663. We will discuss this incident in more detail when we address paleocontacts. Still, for now, we'll note that magnetic field disturbances at Robozero persist despite being over 300 years old. Another phenomenon is crop circles and field patterns. They were observed in ancient times across various European countries and continue to appear in significant numbers in England, Germany, Sweden, the USA, and parts of Russia. This phenomenon is highly intriguing, and we will explore it in greater detail in a separate chapter. On the water and underwater. It turns out that saucers not only fly, but also dive underwater. These are more like amphibious vehicles, or, more accurately, all-terrain flyers. U.S. Navy sailors were astonished to see massive objects moving at incredible speeds of 150 knots during exercises off the coast of Puerto Rico in 1963. Yet, these objects left behind only a faint contrail. The Navy exercise involved the aircraft carrier USS Wasp, 5 escort ships, and several submarines. One submarine reported that it was pursuing an unidentified craft moving at great depth. This craft then descended even deeper, to a depth of 6 kilometers, yet it continued at an incredible speed. Typically, our submarines cannot exceed 45 knots underwater. But here was an object traveling at 150 knots. Interestingly, the first sightings of diving craft were recorded in the early 19th century. In 1806, for example, crew members of the steamship St. Andrew saw 3 silver objects dive into the ocean before their very eyes in the North Atlantic. In 1843, the crew of the brigantine Victoria observed the opposite in the Indian Ocean. 3 strange objects emerged from the water and disappeared into the sky. Today, many similar cases have been documented. Some are particularly intriguing. For instance, in the early 1960s, 2 space objects descended into the waters of Nuevo Gulf in Argentina. Upon closer inspection, 6 underwater spacecraft were detected. The Gulf was later cordoned off and bombed. In March 1966, a cigar-shaped object darted into the waters of St. George Gulf, right in front of shocked tourists. Attempts were made to retrieve the object using traps, but they proved futile against this seemingly futuristic technology. A similar incident occurred in a fjord in Norway in November 1972. Mysterious objects frequenting local skerries were often blamed on Soviet submarines in Sweden. Yet, no one could explain how they could vanish without a trace. Attempts were made to attribute USOs to meteors in some countries. However, this explanation conflicted with the fact that before submerging, these so-called meteors performed bizarre maneuvers, such as circling ships, hovering, and shining beams on witnesses. Here are some marine incidents in chronological order. Dives and ascents from the sea were observed in the Mediterranean in 1953, off the coast of California in 1955, and off the coast of England in 1956. In March 1958, a triangular UFO emerged from the Baltic Sea near the city of Koloberzyg. It then circled a Polish barracks and departed in a northeasterly direction. In 1963, American hydroacoustics detected an object traveling at 150 knots near Puerto Rico. It followed an acoustic research vessel in a zigzag pattern for 4 days, then descended to a depth of 6 kilometers and eventually disappeared. In 1964, American destroyers south of Florida detected an underwater object moving at a record speed of 200 knots at a relatively shallow depth of 90 meters, again without any turbulence or foam. In 1965, the USS Bunker Hill detected an underwater object moving at 150 to 200 knots south of the Azores. To intercept the stranger, the carrier deployed tracker jets. But the object did not wait around. It burst out of the water and shot into the sky at an astonishing rate. On July 20th, 1967, the Argentine vessel Naviero witnessed a bright, glowing, cigar-shaped object traveling along the ocean surface 120 miles off the coast of Brazil. For a quarter of an hour, it moved parallel to the Naviero, then dove underwater, where it continued to glow brightly for several hours. In 1972, a 100-meter disk appeared near the Italian port of Savannah, hovering above the sea and beaming lights downwards from about 200 meters offshore. Then, the disk descended and disappeared underwater. In November 1972, the crew of the destroyer Blackburn encountered 3 UFOs in the Indian Ocean. They circled above it for 17 minutes, then plunged into the water. In May 1975, 90 crew members aboard the American aircraft carrier Franklin Roosevelt observed a large gray disk emerge from Italian waters. It circled the carrier and then disappeared into the depths of the ocean. The crew of a fishing trawler saw a 300-meter-wide donut rise from the sea near New Georgia Island in December 1974. It hovered at an altitude of 4 to 5 kilometers and remained there for over 3 hours. They even managed to photograph it. A large silver object was observed breaking through 3 meters of ice by the crew of a NATO icebreaker during the deep freeze maneuvers in the North Atlantic. It seemed to explode through the ice and then shoot upwards and disappear. Other oddities have been recorded, such as rotating wheels suddenly appearing on the surface, creating huge circles with what look like spokes. This phenomenon has been known since the 19th century. For example, on April 13, 1879, the British warship Welcher saw 2 underwater wheels, each with 16 spokes, rotating at a speed of 100 kilometers per hour in the Persian Gulf. In 1880, off the Malabar coast, 2 ships observed 600-meter-long spokes. Similar spokes were seen by the crew of the Delta in the Malacca Strait in 1907 and the Consueller in the Gulf of Siam in 1908. On September 30, 1922, a very rapid, very bright, counterclockwise rotation of beams was observed by the crew of the steamer Chindwara. The phenomenon has persisted into modern times. In 1967, wheels were seen with beams extending for several kilometers in the Gulf of Siam by the Glenfalloch. The object completed several dozen rotations per minute, with later observations recording even higher speeds of up to 1.5 rotations per second. The navigator of the research vessel, Vladimir Vorobyov, was in the Arabian Sea in 1976 when he summoned the expedition leader to the deck and pointed to the water. A bright white circular spot, with a radius of 150 to 200 meters, had appeared near the ship. It broke into 8 sections, which then began rotating counterclockwise, like the blades of a large propeller. The echo sounder detected an object 20 meters beneath the ship. This phenomenon was recorded at 11:30 p.m. and abruptly ended after half an hour. In 1973, the crew of the ship Anton Makarenko saw radial streaks on the water surface extending to the horizon in the Malacca Strait. These, too, were moving counterclockwise. In July 1978, the Novokuznetsk saw light streaks up to 20 meters wide ahead of its bow in the Gulf of Guayaquil. Then, a sphere the size of a soccer ball arose 100 meters ahead of the ship. It hovered 20 meters above the water, circled the vessel, and then descended back into the sea. Note that most of these wheels appear in warm equatorial waters, possibly because they provide greater energy efficiency. Sometimes it seems UFOs prefer lakes. In 1983, luminous rings were spotted on Lake Onega. Some witnesses claim to have seen giant alien-like beings in the world's most transparent lake, Baikal. They were known rather ominously as the swimmers. However, the most exotic sighting was recorded by glaciologists in the Pamirs. They had set up measuring equipment near Lake Sarez, which is affected by glacial processes. To their astonishment, silver fleas, as they called them, began leaping from the lake's vast waters and soaring into the sky. Another example comes from oceanographers conducting hydrological research at Lake Agarkov, a nature reserve near the stunning Kronotskaya volcano. As researchers approached the center of the lake in a motorboat, a dome of water began to bulge about a kilometer away. An oval disk emerged from it and hovered 40 to 50 meters above the water. Their engine suddenly stopped, forcing the crew to row back to shore. The object then headed toward the Pacific Ocean. Then, the engine resumed working and allowed the research to continue. In Peru, there are rumors that UFOs have chosen the high-altitude saline of Lake Titicaca as their base. Flying devices have often been seen disappearing into its waters. It seems, however, that underwater-based UFOs pursue different goals. In 1982, oceanographer Carl Harris was working near the ruins of the ancient city of Tyre when he saw a giant spherical object connected to pipes and boxes deep underwater. It's possible that the aliens may have been conducting archaeological work on the seabed, or perhaps covering up evidence that they were here in the distant past. In Sevastopol, well-known ufologist A. Kuzovkin heard a story of how a bathyscaphe observed an object the size of a 10-story building on the seabed. This object then rolled onto its side and began rotating around its axis. We have already written about such rotations. What is behind them? Perhaps this generates energy for their engines, as circular motion in magnetized waters creates an effect similar to an electric motor. Encounters have occurred at various depths, including the deepest parts of Earth's oceans. Oceanographer J. Piccard, who descended to the bottom of the Mariana Trench, setting a record for deep-sea descent, noted in his diary, a fairly large disc-shaped object with numerous glowing points was observed. Piccard also encountered underwater UFOs on October 1957 near Guam, and on November 15, 1959 in the Bahamas. A similar incident occurred when a U.S. deep-sea vehicle, equipped with lighting and television systems, submerged to a depth of nearly 11 kilometers in the Mariana Trench. Several hours into the unmanned descent, silhouettes of large objects appeared on television monitors. The microphones also picked up the sounds of scraping metal and muffled thuds. When the platform was raised, it was found that its structures had been severely distorted despite being designed to withstand maximum pressure. Who or what could have caused this? Let's return to the shallower Arabian Sea. On August 9, 1968, the Japanese tanker Yokomaru collided with an underwater object, which left a 50 by 20-meter hole in the tanker's hull. Oil spilled from the breach, and the tanker lost a tenth of its cargo before reaching Bahrain, where it underwent repairs. Recall that in these same waters, the crew of a Soviet research vessel observed wheels and recorded the presence of an unidentified object 20 meters below the keel. Could this area be a base for unidentified underwater submarines? Or even an entire underwater settlement? Perhaps the visitors recharge near deep oceanic rifts, or simply settle nearby. One cannot help but recall the ancient Greek historian Herodotus, who cited accounts of a boat without sails or oars entering the Strait of Gibraltar and rushing through the Mediterranean, an amphibious vessel of extraterrestrials. In the past, such tales were met with skepticism, like fantasies about people with dog heads. Today, however, they are unexpectedly relevant. In his book Invisible Results, Ivan Sanderson argued that UFOs are creations of an underwater civilization existing in the deep trenches of the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. This idea led the author to envision the underwater inhabitants as descendants of the Atlanteans or the even older continent, Mu. In any case, the seafloor is undoubtedly a suitable place for establishing permanent bases for extraterrestrials. Such bases can likely be found in the Pacific Ocean and the Black Sea, where a dense layer of hydrogen sulfide blocks the view just a few hundred meters down. You may ask, why would they need this? First, it's a reliable refuge, especially on such a densely populated planet as Earth. Moreover, the seas and oceans hold resources that may be vital for the visitors. For example, the vast ocean floor of the Pacific contains concretions, which settled and compacted over millions of years into dense, heavy mineral nodules highly prized by chemists, physicists, and metallurgists. These formations contain tungsten, molybdenum, titanium, and many rare metals and elements, including those found by tractor operators in Comey. Aliens somehow use these mineral sources. American scientists were among the first to realize their value. But the most adept at harvesting seabed deposits are indeed those mysterious, unidentified underwater ships and their occupants. Their work goes practically unnoticed, allowing them to quietly replenish their cosmic reserves of our planet's most valuable strategic materials. These are, of course, hypotheses, but the extraterrestrial visitors must get construction materials for their ships from somewhere. Hence, the aerial reconnaissance, saucer scans, landings near rare Earth deposits, and rifts that emit energy beyond our grasp. Keep an eye out for Episode 7, where we delve into the intriguing subject of close encounters.